Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Revenue Committee. We have 4 bills this morning, and we do have quite a few folks here and in person, and we have several on the internet who want to weigh in. So we're going to start with House Bill 139 and House Bill 151.
Mr. Chairman, would you like
roll
me
call.
to take the roll first?
Sorry.
Okay, that's all
I'm just
right.
anxious.
That's fine. Representative Baker,
Here.
Gray,
Here.
Hallinan,
Here.
Jennings,
Here.
Roscoe,
Here.
Sweeney,
Here.
Yen,
Here.
Chairman Harshman, excuse, and
Excuse.
Vice Chairman Henderson.
Here.
We have 8 present, 1 excuse, sir.
Thank you very much. That's a very important detail. So because the first 2 bills are a similar topic, what I'd like to do is go ahead and take them together, and we'll want to get to public testimony as soon as we can. Representative Wharf.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Revenue Committee.
Good morning. Hey, before you get started, I just want to make sure everyone knows brevity will be appreciated. We got a lot to cover here, so thank you. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. I bring before this committee today House Bill 139. It's titled Rolling Stock Tax Exemption Sunset. And you mentioned the bill that you wanted to do concurrent with this one. This bill basically takes the sunset clause out of 39-15-105. It removes the sunset that would take away the exemption for rolling stock cars that are here in the state. Has a very big impact in my county. And from what I understand, the other bill just puts it back in at a later date. And so, Mr. Chairman, I'm willing to do however you want. We could, if you want to discuss your bill, take public comment, whatever, but this is an important bill. I remember a few years ago when this was done, the discussion that was had, it's the same discussion that's going to be here today. This is a mobile company. The reason they have a tax exemption, they can actually load everything up on their cars and send it down to the next state that gives them the exemption. And what it would do in my county is cost us about 100 jobs. And these are good paying jobs. So that's the reason I bring this forward. And we can do this. I know the reason we put sunsets on a lot of these is so that they have to come back and justify that exemption to the legislature. And I appreciate that. I'm sure that's probably one of the reasons for the amendment to put it back in. But I guess I would contend it really doesn't change anything. They'll be back here in another 4 or 5 years and the message is going to be the same. Uintah County right now, it would be detrimental to our county if we were to lose these jobs. There's 5 cities that are impacted. There's 4, I guess, cities that are impacted, but there's 5 different businesses. But it would be a substantial hit. And like I said, the reality of this is you put a tax on this business, which, leaving letting that exemption expire when that tax rolls in, they've said it's just, they would just pick up and leave the state. And the state realizes nothing from that. So that's one reason why I think this isn't something that's going to change, Mr. Chairman. We can put another sunset on, we can come back and visit it again, but it's probably going to be the same story 5 years down the road, 4 years down the road.
Okay.
But I understand it. I'm going to leave it to this body to decide what you want to do, but I would stand for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Representative. I think we have pretty good understanding. Anyone on the committee have any questions? Representative Sweeney?
Thank you, Ms. Vice Chairman. So I'm a little confused because what I'm hearing you say is if we repeal it, the jobs will stay. And I'm thinking just the opposite. if you could explain that a little bit,
Yes.
I honestly am
Yeah, Mr.
confused.
Chairman,
on.
and
Hold on.
Representative Sweeney.
Hold on.
Yep.
Wait till you're recognized, sir. You finished with your question?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead, Representative.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to answer your question. And what it is the sunset repeals the exemption, so they would have to pay the tax. Okay, removing the sunset protects their exemption, so they wouldn't be obligated to pay the tax. And that's what we're talking about is if they're taxed, they've said that they can load up all their business, send it down the rail, because we're talking about rail cars. They can send that down the rail to the next state, which is probably Nebraska, that has an exemption, and they can just relocate their business. So all that does, state doesn't realize any of the taxes they think they'll collect by removing that exemption, and that's what the sunset does. By repealing the sunset, it puts the exemption in place permanently.
Okay.
Does
Okay.
does that answer your question, Mr. Chairman?
I want to avoid repeating if we can, but I appreciate that. Any other questions? Go ahead, Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Worf, do you know about how many companies are involved in this enterprise?
Yeah, and I know there's some public testimony that'll have more detail, but I believe there's 4 cities, but I think it's 5 companies. You know, and I don't know that I can recite them all. I apologize for not being prepared. But I know Uena County, Sweetwater County. I know I don't know, can we mention cities, Mr. Chairman? I know the city of Bill, and I can't remember the other. There's one other one that I'm missing. Shoshone. Okay, I was going to say, so those are the ones that would be impacted, and I just know from my county, I know it's in the magnitude of about 100 jobs, is what I understand.
Go ahead, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Worf, do you know about how long these guys have been in business, these companies?
Mr. Chairman, I just know I moved there in 2000 and they were there. They've been a long time resident of my county. And like I said, there's public testimony that can probably answer that question better than I. I just know that I was here when we had the discussion last time, and you're going to hear the same things that we talked about then. So,
Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So thank you, Representative for being here this morning, giving testimony. So I always have heartburn when the state picks winners and losers, and this is an idea of picking winners and losers. So you have any other industries around that you think we should add into this, that we would maybe want to pick some more winners?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Jennings, I appreciate
on.
the question.
Hold on.
Sorry.
Anything else? Okay, go ahead.
I'm just trying to speed things up, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry. But I appreciate the question, and I am one of those too. I don't like any exemptions. I don't like when people don't have to follow the same laws that everybody else has to. However,
Well,
this
let's-
is a business that's
excuse me.
had,
Let's just stick to the bill.
well, and I'm
Thank you.
getting to that, Mr. Chairman.
We can
It-
have
it
the
does
debate on
come
the
down to
floor.
this. The exemption was given to this company, and to take it away now in a time when everybody's struggling, it doesn't make sense to me, Mr. Chairman, to put a tax on a company that's already had difficulties. So that's why I bring this forward, and that's why I asked that we
Okay.
just repeal the sunset.
Anything else? Any other questions? Representative Yen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Worf, appreciate the bill. So my question is, do you know what the tax rates are in surrounding states for this particular tax, and whether there are jobs or not in those surrounding states where the possibility of these jobs could be moved to? So my question ultimately is, I want to find out what the risk of these jobs being moved somewhere else is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
And Mr. Chairman, Representative Yin, all I can say is I recall from the last discussions that we had is there's other states that have exemptions. I don't know where all they are. I believe Nebraska is the closest. And they have said that, just as easy to run down there and set up shop there. So that's the thing that's important, I think, to understand is that other states offer the exemptions. And I don't know how many, but I just know, is it worth the risk to take away an exemption that's been established for this business, that's been in business for several years, and risk running them off? You know, all I can say is it's the nature of the beast. It's a mobile industry. And I know of instances where we've actually lost money by increasing the registration fees on our vehicles and stuff. Businesses have taken that outside the state. So we never realized the benefits that we thought we would. And I think that's what happens if we allow this sunset to stay in. And that's why I'm asking for it to be removed.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, as I said, these two topics are very similar. House Bill 139, which Representative Wharf just told us about, and also House Bill 151. The difference is primarily his repeals the sunset, and 151 extends it from July of 2021 to July of 2026. And so I think we have some people in the state agencies do we have any state agencies in the room that we would like? I don't think so. How about on the internet, on the Zoom? We have people on there?
Mr. Chairman, we do have Dan Noble from the Department of Revenue. Would you like me to admit it?
You bet. Yes, please. Good morning, Director. Can you hear us?
Morning, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead. Do you have any comments or any information you'd like to provide?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Dan Noble, Director of the Department of Revenue. Thank you very much for allowing us to speak today. One of the things that I want to mention is that the department on an annual basis prepares a number of reports for different exemptions, and the repairs to railroad rolling stock is one of the exemption reports that we do provide to the legislature on an annual basis. One of the questions asked was the number of people involved in this business. On an annual basis, we survey 8 different businesses, of which we get typically six responses. So it's not a lot of different entities, but there are a number of employees involved in this. In 2020, there were 222 positions across the state. The highest recorded has been 253 employees. The amount of tax that is foregone from this exemption on an annual basis, for 2020, it's estimated around $1.2 million. That's fairly consistent. It goes up and down from year to year. And that's on $22 million worth of services and purchases provided by these entities. The reports that I'm referring to are on the Department of Revenue's website under sales tax exemption reporting. So if anyone wishes to look at any of the reports, there's one for manufacturing equipment, there's one for data centers, this one for railroad rolling stock, and I believe there's another one that has never been used, and that is for coal gasification and liquefaction. But those reports are readily available if anybody is interested. And with that, I'll stand for any questions you may have.
Any questions? Representative Gray?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just really quick, Director Noble, any chance you might send that link? I mean, once I have it, I'll know where to go, but I just don't know where it is. Any chance you could send it to the committee? I really appreciate that.
Certainly, we'll do so.
Very good. Any other questions for Director Noble? Representative Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. So, Director, you mentioned about 22 million in purchases that would have been taxable. And I haven't reviewed that report lately. So is that welding materials? What type of materials exactly are we talking about?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sweeney, I believe what we're talking about is things like sheet metal, parts, sometimes they have to replace brakes, wheels, things like that on these cars. Virtually anything that would need repair could be a purchase associated with that. Now, the sales are the actual sales of the labor. In the state of Wyoming, most repair, alteration, or improvement of tangible personal property is subject to the tax. So this would include the cost of those repairs as well.
Follow up? Anyone else? Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Noble, I think it was the last time there was a sunset, it was 2015 on this rolling stock exemption. And there was supposed to be a report about, I think it was how it affected employment. And I don't know if your department got that or not. And I was just wondering, so they're just trying to determine if this tax was really affecting employment or not. Do you have any information on that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Roscoe, there was not a break in the actual exemption in 2015. There was a break for 2 years in the reporting. When you look at the actual report, you can see that I think the years of 2013 and 14 are missing from the actual reporting. So there was a break in that, but there was wasn't a break in the actual exemption during those 2 years. So that's something that is data that we not have. Now, one of the things that is part of the report now that was not in the past is that the Department of Economic Analysis and the Business Council have been involved in this process. And on an annual basis now, the report does provide modeling by REMI. I'm not sure what that acronym stands for, but it is an econometric modeling of what this would look like should the exemption go away. And that report is available on the same website. And I will send that link to anyone that wants to see it as far as what's the
And send it to the committee, if you would, Director. That'd be great. Anything else? Okay, let's move on with the rest of the public testimony. In the room here, I see Chairman Burkhart. Would you like to testify or make comment on this bill, sir? Or either one of these two bills?
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair, Mr. Vice Chairman. Yes, and I would remind the committee that what I'm here for are the jobs, and that's what we're talking about. More than, to me, a tax break. I really dislike tax exemptions. We write legislation and immediately start exempting people from it and businesses. But this is one where I think we've proven that the exemption works. It provides a lot of good paying jobs in the state. In communities that really we've looked at is how do you provide jobs in those communities. And this is one. Well, I might disagree. I've spent a lot of money at the Bill store, but I wouldn't call it a city. It is growing. If you've not been there lately, they have a hotel. So a nice community, nice people in that area. But this provides work for people who then spend that money. These are good jobs. They have benefits. And they're jobs that I think mesh well with our economy in Wyoming and our lifestyle. And I would speak really in favor of the jobs to keep the tax exemption in place, whether you want to limit it to 5 years and we revisit this in another 5 years or remove it completely. And there are some issues I would address, but they're outside the scope of both bills. But I would really, and just to be brief again, consider the jobs. And that's what we're really talking about here. And I think the jobs and the spending from those people can really outweigh any reduction in tax money we might see. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Chairman,
Chairman.
committee.
Any questions for Chairman Burkhart? Thank you, sir. Any other legislators in the room would like to testify? Okay, I don't think we have any on the internet. Go
Mr.
ahead,
Chairman,
Senator. Sorry, I saw I didn't. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to reiterate, pretty much the same thing that the Representative Burkhardt mentioned. 100 jobs out of our community would be devastating because you have to think about each of those folks may have 3 or 4 or 5 kids. And, so if we lose 300 or 400 or 500 people out of our community, it would really hurt us. This company's been around for more than 20 years and they're a very solid company. And like I said, it was growing. We were over 100 jobs for a while, and it looked like it was going to continue to go on the upside until the pandemic hit. And but still, 100 jobs is quite impactful in our community. So I hope you take a look at it. I think either one of these bills would be acceptable. If the first one doesn't go by, then I think the second one. Honestly, I think in 5 years, if you took a look at it again, you'll see the return on investment for our community is more than a positive thing to take a look at. So just kind of reiterating what the bringer of the bill and Representative Burkhardt said. So I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Go ahead, Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. So you mentioned that the company had been around for like 20 years because I'm equating this to the major railroad companies. But is there a separate company out there that is actually servicing the cars?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, and I don't know if I can mention the name of the company, so I won't, but it's separate from Union Pacific or whatever. It's a separate company. So thank you.
I think Representative Roscoe was next and then Representative. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Schuler, I guess the question that we have with all these exemptions, is it really going to take away the jobs? And so I guess one thing is if the companies have been there for 20 years, then they started before there was an exemption and seem to do okay. And I just want to know if they're just trying to make a business decision for Wyoming, and if are we taking into consideration all the other tax differences within surrounding states, such as corporate income tax or things that other states don't have, fuel tax. And I mean, I'm concerned about the workers as well. I'm going to come up with a question, I think. But we know that just the workers themselves don't pay what it costs to educate their kids in roads, law enforcement, and the things that the state does supply. So I guess I'm just looking for, when we're comparing other states, we're comparing everything. So if you have any more information, that would be great. Or if you disagree, that'd be fine too. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you,
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I think, the return on investment the way I look at it is, we're getting sales and use tax from a lot of these folks that live in our communities. They're buying cars there, they're buying groceries, they're living in our community, they're paying taxes that way. The business, quite frankly, they employ a lot of our young kids that don't really want to go to college. Maybe they want to be welders or machinists or, so I think it's a niche that provides a real important piece for our community. Maybe jobs that, would leave. I think the company possibly would leave. I mean, I'm not sure, but I think if things become too difficult, which, we see this with the pandemic, a lot of the companies are struggling, and I know they have laid off of some folks, and some of these young folks are having a hard time, finding jobs in our community, and just as though I'm sure a lot of you are seeing the same thing in your community. So it's a real important business. That's all I can say. And they do pay their taxes just like we do. And, if there were a corporate tax, I think that would be something that would, possibly that company, it might not be big enough to take advantage of what other states
Excuse me,
have.
let's focus on the exemption.
Sure.
Thank you.
So anyway.
Okay, thank you. Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Senator, I just have a quick question. Do you know if the company that you're referencing has received SBA money or Wyoming Business Council money for CARES Relief Act?
Mr. Chairman, is it all right if I?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, as far as I know, I don't think so. I have seen, I've gone on the website and looked at some of the companies. I don't recall seeing their name on there. So
Okay.
I'm not going to say for sure, but as far as I know, I don't believe they have.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, we'll go back to the room first as far as, I don't think we have any more legislators. And then let's go to the internet. And who do we have on the internet that would like to testify on these two bills?
Mr. Chairman, if you would like to instruct people in the Zoom waiting room who would like to testify to raise their hand.
Please
I
raise
can-
your hand if you're in the Zoom waiting room, if you'd like to testify on House Bill 139 or House Bill 151. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm admitting Nathan Anderson.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Please give your name and who you represent. Thank you. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Nathan Anderson, and I represent Union Pacific Railroad. I'm before this committee, I'm before this committee this morning to voice support for House Bill 151 and encourage the committee to extend the sunset on the railroad rolling stock sales tax exemption. I want to highlight just a few key points. I know others will elaborate to a greater degree. First and foremost, this exemption is a net benefit to the state. The Wyoming Department of Revenue reported in 2020 that the cost of the exemption of approximately $1.2 million would be offset by a reduction in GDP of $2.7 million without the exemption. It's precisely this kind of reporting that makes the exemption both justifiable and highly transparent. Further, from a tax policy standpoint, the tax itself is also transparent. Railroad rolling stock is a business input. Taxing inputs reduces transparency through pyramiding of taxes on top of other taxes, which leads to increased consumer costs and ultimately makes local producers less competitive. Second, this transparency and resultant relative low cost stabilizes the business development ecosystem and promotes the business-friendly brand of the state, justifying the foregone revenue as industry brings jobs to Wyoming. The net economic benefit provides stability, representing jobs, families, and livelihoods, and encompasses the greater vision to not just survive, but thrive doing business in Wyoming. If you're looking for further justification for this exemption, I'll highlight that west of the Mississippi, from Chicago and New Orleans to the Pacific coast, only 5 states do not offer this exemption. That's 5 out of 26 states, or more than 80% of states providing the exemption. It's generally accepted best practice in tax policy, and multiple neighboring states, including Colorado, Nebraska, and Montana, offer the exemption. I encourage you to support House Bill 151, and I'm happy to answer any questions should the chair allow.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Anderson? Go ahead, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Anderson, what are the plans for, do you have any plans for expansion in Wyoming, doing more work here?
So these are jobs that are done by third-party contractors on behalf of Union Pacific Railroad and other railroads. So in terms of expansion, it really depends on what's going on in the marketplace and volume of business. We're seeing a resurgence in volume following a drop-off in the pandemic, and so those are the key things that will drive volume changes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Anderson, so it's reasonable to assume because Utah doesn't have the exemption that you guys bring the rolling stock over here to Wyoming to repair, correct?
That is a reasonable assumption. Yes.
Any other questions? Representative Yen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Anderson, so if other neighboring states also have this exemption, why are they in Wyoming right now versus another neighboring state that has an exemption?
So,
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Yen, I think the answer to that question is that there are repair activities going on in other states, and this is again an exemption that exists in the state of Wyoming, which reinforces the work being done here. Again, the input that is being put into the railroad rolling stock. As for, I apologize. I think that the answer, the most succinct answer to your question, Representative, is that having the exemption in place allows for continuance, a continued good business environment, and weighs in favor of continuing that business here.
Okay, any other questions? All right, I have one question for you, Mr. Anderson. Going back to the importance of jobs in this, what is the current number of jobs that are related to repair work? And then what is the total number of railroad related jobs? And how does that translate into other economic activity? Briefly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe from the Department of Revenue report, there are 231 jobs in the repair of railroad rolling stock, producing, I believe that was $11 million in, I apologize, I had the number sitting here in front of me and now I don't see it, but I want to say it was $11 million in revenue, in salary for those rolling stock. Union Pacific employs in Wyoming about 935 individuals, so almost not quite 1,000, and has a payroll of about $73.5 million in including the rolling stock in-state purchases. We have other non-exempt purchases totaling about $56.3 million. Last year, we invested about $55 million in capital investment and almost $170,000 in charitable giving through our foundation and through our matching gifts programs.
Very good. Okay, do we have anyone else on the internet with their hand raised?
Mr. Chairman, we have 2 additional individuals. I'll admit the next one, Travis Detty.
Thank you. I guess Travis Detty. Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you just fine. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Travis Detty with the Wyoming Mining Association, and I will be brief because I know there are people in the room that can speak more eloquently to these bills than I can. But the Mining Association and my member companies are supportive of keeping the exemption in place. You have 2 bills that would do that. I think the preferred bill would be 151. With the sunset to continue and for 5 years. But this is just a matter of when you look at my member companies and the producers, this is about cost. And if the exemption would go away, it would drive costs up. And in a very difficult operating environment for the mining industry, it would just make it more expensive to do business. So we support keeping the exemption in place, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Detty? Okay, thank you, Travis. And then
Thank
we
you,
had
sir.
one other hand raised, I think you said.
Yes, I'll admit Larry Moon.
You know, it's amazing how quick humans are relative to computers, right? Good morning, sir. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, sir, I can. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I think we have Mr. Larry Moon. Is that right?
That is correct.
Who do you represent?
Union Tank Car in Evanston, Wyoming.
Go ahead, sir.
We just want to take a few minutes, and we had a short statement prepared to kind of show our case for this. If we could.
Excuse me, sir. Brevity's appreciated. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Tanner Brimhall, the Safety and Human Resources Manager with Union Tank Car Company in Evanston, Wyoming. I believe that it's important to share with you today who we are not only as a company, but as a leading provider in rail car repair services within the region. For over 30 years, Union Tank Car Company of Evanston, Wyoming has proven itself as a leading shop within the rail car repair network. The Evanston facility has earned this status by successfully repairing tank and freight cars with unsurpassed quality, turnaround, and a geographical advantage of servicing the West Coast. We take pride in having highly skilled employees who take pride in the safe practices and delivery of quality work. We continue to push for perfection and growth through grit, commitment, and excellence. Union Tank Car Company of Evanston has the ability to continue leading the industry in turnaround times, to decrease customer downtime, the versatility to overcome any obstacles, and committed safety culture to instill our values in all our endeavors. UTCW is forever West, an opportunist and leader in innovation, growth, and investment. The railroad rolling stock tax exemption is detrimental to the continuation of Union Tank Car Company's ability to maintain a strong foothold within our communities and region through maintaining the strong relationships that have been established over decades of work with our customers and competitive pricing. We're projecting heavy growth in the coming years in multiple areas, such as additions to infrastructure and expansions to accommodate additional repairs and processes at our Wyoming locations, develop, build, and grow our workforce by 10% year to year to meet upcoming demand of rail cars due to be qualified over the next 5 years, and increase our total workforce to exceed the 170 total individuals that was our peak in February of 2020. Union Tank Car Company projects by the year 2025, qualifications due will be at its highest. Maintaining the railroad rolling stock tax exemption will allow UTLX to continue offering competitive pricing to our customers, as well as affording the business to strengthen the roots that have been established in the industry, as well as maintaining the firm grip we have on the market within the Western region. I would like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for allowing us to speak today, and we are open to any questions that you may have for us.
Thank you. Any questions for presenter? Okay, thank you very much. Do we have anyone else on the internet who'd like to testify?
No, Mr. Chairman, I don't see any other hands up.
Hey, how about in the room here? Anyone who'd like to testify? We have two. Just raise your hand. 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. State your name and who you represent, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jonathan Downing, representing Union Tank Company and Progress Rail, which is a Caterpillar company. These are two of the companies that you've seen around the state, and you already heard from Union Tank Car, so I won't go into too much detail on that end. With this policy decision before you, this is mainly about a couple things, but the first piece that I'd like to point to, and we're just going to be brief on this versus what we normally would have, but there was a report that was presented in the November Revenue Committee meeting earlier last year, back in November. And so some of the new members might not be aware of this report, but the report had mainly looked at the effects of this exemption on the industry. And on page 11 of that report, the piece that I would go to primarily is that, and just quoting from the report, this exemption removal would result in an average annual loss of 33 jobs and a decrease in GDP, gross domestic product, for Wyoming of 2.7 million per year over the period of 2020 to 2030 when compared to their baseline scenario. The other services that would be impacted by this if we don't continue the exemption would be construction, retail, trade, accommodation, and food service sectors, as far as sustaining the most of the job losses. And then direct job losses would also be found in other services and construction sectors, while retail, trade, and accommodation and food service sectors, being consumption-driven industries, will see declines in employment as personal income and salaries are reduced. And normally we try to come with you as far as going, let's look at the positive of some things with legislation versus just saying, okay, here's what happens if you don't pass the bill. And what I'd like to point to here is that there have been economic strategies that have been discussed as far as how the future of Wyoming looks and looking at those policy decisions. And this is one of those situations where you look at existing industries, two companies that have been here 20 and 30 plus years, but they're also here because of the environment, as well as we do have a competitive advantage over other states in west of the Mississippi when you have this exemption in place. And that's the piece that in this situation, you can see here's an example of where the net positive of an exemption is working. Normally I'd be going into a lot more detail, but in the interest of time and some of the testimony you've already
Revenue is
heard.
appreciated. Is
Okay,
that about it?
Thank you, sir.
Okay, question? Representative Baker?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I appreciate you bringing up the report. It's the report that we were just sent by the director. I have it pulled up here and some other things that I'd like to just ask you about. On page 3, it says in fiscal year 20, a single user representing 54% of the total exemptions, and that's consistent with the prior years. It says it may be important to note that this company does not have any employees in Wyoming. So I just want to point that out, and I just would like a comment about that. And then further down in the report, I guess, this isn't my issue, but it's a little bit troubling, but it says 95% of the workforce is men. There's only 10 women in the whole workforce, and they only make 87% of the wage of what men make. So, I mean, the report, it has a lot of things in it. I appreciate you pointing out some of the other things, but there's also a lot of negative associated with this. So can you comment on the 54% and that single user not having a single employee in Wyoming?
Excuse me, let's focus on the exemption. Go ahead, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you like me to answer both of those?
As it focuses on the exemption.
Okay, thank
I
you.
don't want to go all over the pasture here.
As it focuses on the exemption, I understand that there may be an amendment being brought at a later time that would be dealing with companies that have more than one employee to ensure that the exemption is working as intended. And
Okay.
with respect to.
Any other questions? Okay, who's next? Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members
morning.
of the committee. My name is Tammy Johnson with Wyoming State AFL-CIO. And we hear a lot when exemptions come before the committee or the legislature about jobs and that this is going to impact jobs negatively if you don't do this. I don't know, Representative Baker, I appreciate you're looking at that data very closely because the difference between jobs and Wyoming jobs is big for our communities. I don't know if what you've heard about jobs going away, I don't know why a company that's projecting a 10% growth every year over the next 10 years would say we're going to lose jobs if you don't give us a tax exemption. But what I might ask you to think about is if the jobs go away, can you write something into the bill so if the jobs go away, the exemption goes away? So the exemption is tied to this notion that we have people in Wyoming working in these jobs. If Wyoming workers don't get these jobs, and we do have a statutory definition of Wyoming laborer, so if they don't fit into that definition, are they Wyoming workers? And if the workers go away, the exemption goes away. I think that's probably pretty easy to measure. So
Anything else?
I think
Okay,
that's a
any
lot.
It's a big subject. Any questions? Thank you, Ms.
Thank you very
Johnson.
much,
Appreciate
Mr.
you
Chairman.
being here. Who's next? State your name and who you represent, please. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jody Levin, testifying today on behalf of the Trona industry. I will echo Mr. Detai's comments about the benefit of this exemption to the mining sector. This is a benefit to the Trona industry. You will notice that several of these companies are located in Southwest Wyoming. That geographic location provides operational efficiencies for the industry. Prior to these companies locating, they had to, they sent all of their cars to Nebraska. So you can imagine the downtime that it causes when you have to take a car all the way to Nebraska versus having it repaired locally in either Rock Springs, Green River, or Evanston. With me today is also Mr. Craig Rude from Jenner. He just gave me a bit of interesting history. Mountain States is one of the rolling stock companies. Jenner actually helped get that company started in part to realize the operational efficiencies. So we would ask for a continuation of the exemption. Of the two bills, I think this is a policy matter for the legislature, but the Trona industry certainly has no concerns with the legislature wanting to routinely review the exemption and make sure that it's having its intended benefit.
Okay, any questions? Representative Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you hit on kind of a key point for me that I totally spaced. A lot of the rolling stock cars are actually, if I'm correct, owned by the different utility companies when it comes to coal. Is the same true with the Trona industry? Do they actually own some of the cars?
Mr. Chairman.
Levine, go ahead.
Representative Sweeney, and Mr. Rude may need to join me. I threatened him that if the questions got to a point where I couldn't answer them, he'd have to come up here. But some of the companies do own the cars. And I was remiss in saying too that the Trona industry is actually planning significant expansion. So we do see that there will be an increased need for repairs and for jobs.
Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead, Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Levine, for the Trona industry, are there specialized cars that are used just for Trona and maybe nowhere else in the region?
Mr. Chairman, may I have Mr. Rude join me?
You bet. Yeah. Welcome, Mr. Rude. Say your name and who you represent for the record. Thank you.
Good morning, committee. Mr. Chairman, my name is Craig Rude. I'm with Jenner, Wyoming. May I answer the question?
Go ahead.
So they are not special cars, they're grain cars, but they are dedicated service cars to soda ash. So when we actually lease most of them, they are dedicated to the Trona industry, but they can be used for other things when the lease ends.
Follow up.
So I just assume that there would be a benefit then. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A benefit to having it done locally, pretty close, and it would be a cost savings probably for your industry as well as the railroad.
Mr. Rude?
Yeah. Yes, it's definitely a benefit, like Ms. Levin mentioned, of the downtime especially, because sometimes it's something as simple as a seal on the top hatch that can be changed right there versus going all the way to Nebraska to get changed. I think the one thing that I would just add is that if this exemption does go away and the companies do stay in business in Wyoming, it would be passed on to us is where the cost would go.
Okay, anything else? Good, very good. Thank you very much. Who's else would like to testify on these two bills? House Bill 139 and 151. Repeal or extend. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Lisa Johnson. I'm here on behalf of the Wyoming Economic Development Association, and we advocate for policy that benefits existing industry in Wyoming and draws new industry to the state, and also that provides tools for communities. And I think one of the important points about this legislation is it provides a tool that can attract industry and jobs to any community in Wyoming, from the big communities that you've already heard about and to the small communities like Shoshone or Upton or Yoder that are working to attract industry to their rail assets. So the other final point I'd like to make is that when you look at the economic activity that's generated, you want to see jobs that are higher than the average wage. And the report that has been mentioned shows that the average wage for this industry, or the companies that are working in this industry, is $25 an hour. And that's more than $5 higher than the average wage in Wyoming. So that's going to generate a higher economic impact. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much. Anyone else like to testify? Come forward, please. I'm going to pose a hard stop here at 9. So we got 2 more bills beside this to work. Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Cindy Delancey, and I'm the president of the Wyoming Business Alliance. I stand before you this morning in support of either one of these bills, hoping that, again, the legislature will choose from a policy perspective which one to advance. I don't want to reiterate a lot of the testimony that's already been offered in support of both of these bills, but just wanted to bring up maybe a little bit of a different approach on this. We've been trying very hard in Wyoming to help promote the trades with our Wyoming students. And these are exactly the types of jobs that our CTE students can go into and earn a very good living in the future. So providing that future for our Wyoming students with these types of jobs here within our state is an avenue to keep our children within our state and make them productive. In addition, the direct testimony from Mr. Root is that these costs are basically passed on within the natural resource extraction industry. We're at a time where our friends in the natural resource industry are under regulatory assault and truly cannot take any more additional costs passed on to them to be able to contribute as they have for generations to Wyoming's economy. So for these reasons, the WBA stands in support of these bills. These are both pro-business bills, and we ask for your favorable consideration. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much. Anyone else? Okay, we're going to close public comment. Committee, we have two bills very similar, as you know. I'd like to exercise a little chairman prerogative here and see if you'd be okay with going ahead with the 151. And come on up, Representative Worf, help us with this. But I want to listen to the committee. Any comments? Representative Jennings, do you have something? No? Okay. What's the committee's pleasure? You have a motion? Representative Hallinan?
I'll move House Bill 139.
Okay, do we have a second? Second? No second. How about House Bill 151? And a motion? Representative Hallinan?
I'll move House Bill 151.
Any seconds? Representative Sweeney, second. Okay, discussion. Go ahead, Representative Yen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I try to compare exemptions on how much value they bring to the state of Wyoming versus repealing the exemption and the value that we would get from the sales tax revenue, right? So I'm not entirely convinced that this one weighs in favor of keeping the exemption, but I'm willing to bring the sunset extension to the floor. So I think I will vote in favor of this one, just to bring it to the floor. I can't guarantee that's what I will vote on the floor though.
Thank you, Representative. Any other comments, discussion? Representative Baker.
Well, thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. And I know that we're pressed for time, but I just encourage members to look at the report. There is a lot of information related to gender and some other things in there, in state, whether there's employees that these companies employ that are in state or not. So just good information. Appreciate the director providing that link to us, and would just encourage everyone to take a look at that before, if this makes it out of the committee.
Thank you. I don't echo that. There is a lot of good information in there. Representative Hallinan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the testimony of the director that 230 odd employees in the state of Wyoming are currently employed in this field versus the tax loss of $1 million, I think indicates that that's about $5,000 per employee. And the amount of money that they would contribute to our economy by being in our state, I think is more than $5,000. And for that reason, I'd be in favor of this bill, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Representative Gray?
Mr. Chairman, is there appropriate time to do amendments?
If there's any amendments, you bet.
Thank you,
Motion.
Mr. Chairman.
Get a second. Go ahead, make
I'd
your
like to
motion.
bring in amendment. We got these two bills, and I meant to try to get rid of
We're
the,
on House Bill 151.
right. I meant to get rid of the exemption entirely. So since the other one wasn't moved, let's just do it this way. I'd like to bring an amendment to remove line 7, the word this through 2026 on line 8. So just get rid of
Excuse me, what page are you on?
page 2, line 7. Remove, strike the word this through July 1st, 2026. So we strike that sentence.
You got it? Okay. Is that it? That's your motion? If we have a second?
Mr. Chairman, point of order. I think that there's another date in the bill.
I do. Go ahead. What's your point?
Mr. Chairman, I think there's another date in the bill. If we're gonna bring the amendment, I think we have to do it more. Also line
Yeah, that's
22,
fine.
but
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead.
can I amend my motion?
I don't think we have a second yet.
Okay,
I don't see a second.
okay.
You certainly have opportunity to bring that on the floor if you like. Do we have any more amendments to House Bill 151? Okay, am I hearing
Call the
someone?
question.
Question. Go ahead and call the roll there, please.
Representative Baker,
no.
Gray,
Aye.
Hallinan,
Aye.
Jennings.
Aye.
Was that an aye, sir?
Aye.
Roscoe,
No.
Sweeney,
Aye.
Yin,
Aye.
Chairman Harshman left an aye vote. Mr. Vice Chairman,
Aye.
we have 7 ayes, 2 noes, the noes being Representatives Baker and Representative Roscoe.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Representative. Look forward to working with you. Thank you. Good presentation. Okay, the next bill up for consideration is House Bill 176. And so what I'd like to do is transfer the chairmanship to, would you take over, Representative Hallinan?
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Good morning, Mr.
Would you like to present the bill now?
Thank you very much.
Thank
Members of the committee, I bring you House Bill 176 and ask for your favorable consideration. I did send out some information, as you know, but for the public that's here and the people listening online, what this is it applies an amendment, well, it updates the statute, which we opened up a few years ago, the digital products and services. And what it does is it's statute 3915-103, 3915-111. And what it does is it's not a new tax. It's updating the tax code and it's applied, it's a parity. It's applying the sales and use tax to digital streaming service subscriptions. This would be like your Hulu, your Netflix, and so forth. Now, there is a federal act that we want to take account of, and working with the folks in the private sector, we have a couple of proposals for amendments. And so I think generally the bill speaks for itself, sir, in broad terms, in terms of potential revenue for our state. This is going to generate, in the case of, for example, Netflix and Hulu, which is the most frequent subscription in our state. There's 233,000 plus households, and there's 255,000 plus subscriptions that I'm aware of on those two. Could generate up to almost $15 million a year. Now, one policy decision that's in here for the committee to consider is it divides the revenue received in 3 parts for the 3 main education accounts. So this provides a response to many people who've sent emails. I know I received several hundred emails asking us to consider ways to generate revenue for our education accounts. And so that's pretty much the bill, Mr. Chairman. And I'd be willing to answer questions, but I say I have two amendments And so if you'd like to hold on to those until after the testimony of the public, I'd be happy to do that, or I can briefly go over them.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that presentation. Does anybody have a question of the chairman? I don't see any questions from the committee. Would there be members on the internet that have questions on this bill?
Mr. Chairman, if you'd like to instruct people in the Zoom waiting room to raise their hand, I will admit them. I'm going to admit Director Noble.
Let's see if he has any.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Would you like to make a presentation on this bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dan Noble, Director, Department of Revenue again. I think there's a couple of issues that we would have associated with the bill, and it's really administrative in nature. And I believe that the amendment that Vice Chairman Henderson put forth will deal with one of those issues, and that is whether or not it would align with the streamlined sales tax agreement. The other concern we have is we're changing distribution of a regular sales tax for a specific industry to move it into the education sector. That is not a trivial matter, number one, because we almost have to create another tax return, if you will, for that specific industry in order to be able to segregate that revenue from other revenue sources. The other aspect of it is the actual distribution itself is really difficult for us to administer without significant system changes. As it stands right now, sales tax revenue is based on population within a county where the sale occurs and those types of things. And that's something that is used for virtually every other sales tax that's out there. So it would change the nature of how we would administer the tax. I think the biggest concern would be the administrative hurdle. And I'll give you an example. One of the largest providers of these services not only sells streaming services, but they sell an awful lot of other items as well. And that would not be segregated from the sales of streaming services. So you really wouldn't know how to set up the distribution for these particular types of services. In asking them to segregate those sales, you're running afoul of the streamlined sales tax agreement on remote sales. And I think that would be problematic as well. But our concern is administrative and the cost of changing the administration in order to handle this distribution. It's not it's the only place in the statute where we would actually have a separate distribution other than lodging services. And lodging today has a separate tax return in order to be able to carve out that sort of thing. So this would create some administrative costs that I'm not sure we were really aware of until we started looking at the actual distribution piece of the bill. And with that, I'll stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Would anybody on the committee wish to address a question to Director Noble? Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Noble, I know we didn't really have a fiscal note on this one just because it came in late. Do you have any sort of estimate on how much revenue we could generate with this? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Yin, like as you said, it came in late. I think there is an estimate out there of the number of households that would actually have these types of streaming services out there. And I'm not going to debate Representative Henderson's estimate of $15 million in revenue. I think that's probably as reasonable as any estimate that's out there at this point. We don't have a way of segregating it, and we've actually contacted several other states that actually have this tax, and they're not really capable of doing it either. But that figure is probably reasonable, I would think.
Thank you, Director Noble. Did you have Vice Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for the
An answer
director.
to that question?
Right now, across our country, we have 45 states that have a sales and use tax, and of that, 33 have legalized applying the sales tax to digital products. Most recently in January, Colorado to the south of us. And one of the key things that we need to keep in mind here is the federal law and not trying to bump into that Tax Freedom Act. And we have a couple of proposals here. My question to you, Director, though, is do you think it's doable in terms of updating our administrative processes as you're referring to?
Director Noble.
Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman Henderson, I'm not saying it's not doable. I'm just saying that the thing that makes this difficult for the department to administer is the actual distribution into the education funds, because that is very different from the way we deal with any other sales tax. So there would be a significant cost to making that happen. And if you're going to carve out a specific industry for a separate reporting, we could run afoul of the streamlined sales tax agreement, because we're asking one class of vendor to do something different than we do others. That's all I'm saying. Is it doable? Certainly. It is just going to be expensive to get it in place, and it may put us out of compliance with the agreement. That's really the only concerns I have.
Vice Chairman Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, Mr. Chairman. Director, then would it be more cost effective and simplify the process if we modified the bill, amended the bill to have the revenue go to say the general fund or something like that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, as long as the distribution of the tax is the same as all other sales tax, and you could do that by removing the current distribution model that's in the bill. If you remove that distribution, we have absolutely no problem with it, because then it would be treated like any other sales tax.
Okay, that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Any other questions for Director Noble? Not seeing any. I guess then the next would be any other folks from, excuse me, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Noble, I've been debating whether to get in here, and I appreciate your work, but I'm opposed to the bill, but to me, it's like the increase in sales tax that has been proposed to go to education. How can the department have an issue with, I guess you were just saying it's difficult, but we can't do the flows based on what's most convenient for the department, in my opinion. How difficult is it for you?
Mr. Chairman,
Noble.
Representative Gray, I was not speaking against the administration of it. All I'm saying is it'll cost us time and money. And I don't have an actual estimate of what the cost would be to create a new tax return for these specific businesses and to create a different distribution model for them, but it's not a trivial matter. These systems are set up to handle thousands of tax returns in an efficient manner. This just carves out one piece of that, and in doing so, it creates a computer programming problem that we'll have to deal with. I'm not saying we can't do it. That was not my intention at all. It's just going to cost time and money to make it happen. That's the only testimony.
Any other questions for Director Noble? Don't see any. Thank you, Director Noble. And any other people from the internet wish to get involved here?
Mr. Chairman, I have one other individual. I'll admit Monica Leininger.
And you may admit her. Thank you.
How many people in that room?
Hmm?
How
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Can you hear me okay?
Thank you. Go ahead.
My name is Monica Leininger, speaking on behalf of Powder River Basin Resource Council and our members. Our organization's founding members include family farmers and ranchers with historic roots in the Powder River Basin. Today, we represent approximately 2,000 people from across the state that seek to sustain Wyoming's quality of life for current and future generations. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be in front of you today. Over deep concern about the state's fiscal status, our members have become increasingly interested in concepts to diversify and increase our state's revenue streams. We stand today in support of House Bill 176 and the bill being heard after House Bill 128. We continue to support equitable taxation that helps to fund the state's core public services and distributes the burden to uphold our state's quality of life. We would also support amendments for revenue from House Bill 176 to go more broadly to the state and not in the practice of using different coffee cans for state revenue. So with that, I'll stand for any questions and thank you so much.
Thank you. Would anybody in the committee have any questions for the witness? Saying none, thank you. And now I guess we could go to the audience. Would everybody have wish to speak, would raise their hand? I see about 5. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Switching a hat here, now appearing before you, Jody Levin on behalf of Charter Communications. As drafted, this bill would place a sales tax on cable service. Cable service is already subject to a 5% franchise fee, so that is a fee that your customers pay. And looking at my most recent bill, that is $8.54 a month. In visiting with the bill sponsor, he shared with me that his intent was really to try to tax what are known as the over-the-top providers, these streaming services, as he referenced things like Hulu and Netflix, not the underlying cable service. So I did work with Vice Chairman Henderson on an amendment to clarify that if you are already subject to a video franchise fee, that you would then not be subject to this sales tax. This is how most states who have done digital streaming taxes have tried to equate this situation where there is a video franchise fee already in place. They typically exempt that out so that customers aren't seeing double taxation. We appreciate the willingness of the Vice Chair to work with us on that amendment, and I'd stand for any questions.
Anybody on the committee have any questions for the witness? Saying none, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next testimony person.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Dave Pickard. I represent Dish Network. And based on the aspects of the bill and the proposed amendment by the cable industry, we have a suggested amendment so that our services are on parity with their services. Mr. Chairman, on the bill itself, we neither support or oppose the bill. It is a decision of this legislature whether you're going to impose the tax on the customers receiving this video content, whether it be through cable or via satellite. I would remind the committee that 44% of the broadcast services recipients in the state of Wyoming utilize satellite, primarily because of the rural nature of the state. And simply our changes to the proposed amendment will bring in 47 USC 522.13, which talks about a multi-channel video programming distributor. So it would be our position, if you accept the exemption for cable providers, that you would also accept the exemption for satellite so that there is no discrimination in this tax proposal. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions. I do want to make one reference to franchise fees. And we certainly acknowledge that the cable industry pays franchise fees, but let's also be clear that franchise fees come with an asset that they are able to achieve, which is the access to the right of way and the ability to service their customers through the public property, primarily in the municipalities. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Pickard. Any questions for Mr. Pickard? I think Representative Sweeney.
Thank
has
you,
a
Mr.
question.
Chairman. So, Mr. Pickard, how does your amendment track into, I mean, where does that start on the bill itself? Page.
Mr. Chairman, I think what you need to do is go to the proposed amendment from Representative Henderson.
Okay.
Which starts at page 3, lines 1 through 16. And on that amendment, you would be looking at I apologize here. I know in essence of time, I apologize. If you look on the amendment, page 1 of the amendment, line 18, after the word benefit, where you see the insertion in red of or those services with gross revenue subject to a franchise fee described in 47 USC 542Q or G, I can't read that. We just replace it with our highlighted yellow language that is on the second sheet of the proposed amendment to the amendment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Follow up.
Do you want to have a follow-up? Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, not knowing a lot about the different business models, if we adopted this in particular amendment to the amendment, Dish's business model, does that preclude, I'm assuming they already are part of the streaming network as a provider with Dish services. So by doing this amendment, does that preclude the state from collecting on, say, Netflix to the end user?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sweeney, no, it does not. What you would be doing by adopting the proposed amendment to the amendment, you would be simply putting on parity the digital broadcast satellite services along with cable operators.
Okay. Any question? Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pickard, I don't want to get in between you and the other individual, but I don't know if Ms. Levin has seen your amendment. It occurs to me, reading your amendment and hers, proposed that we could insert your amendment in between benefit and or on line 18.
Mr. Chairman or Vice Chairman Henderson. Mr. Pickard did share the amendment with me, and I did receive feedback from my client that if it's the intent to ensure parity and have satellite be on equal footing with cable, then there are no concerns with the amendment.
Follow up.
Go ahead.
So then, just to be clear, you'd have no problem if we just went with the proposal that we received this morning.
Vice Chairman Henderson, that is correct.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Any other questions from the witness? Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My only little concern here is my worry is that would this language, because I don't know the US code, also exempt virtual MVPDs, so like YouTube TV and, okay, then I'm fine with this. So, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Yin, it would not. And I have provided Vice Chairman Henderson with the 47 USC 522.13, and I'm happy as we stand up from the testifying table, I'll drop that off with you as well.
Thank you, Mr. Pickard and Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to be clear, so we would drop the current red language and insert the yellow language, and everybody's kosher with that. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Don't see any.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there any more testimony?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Bill Novotny on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. We stand in opposition to Senate File 176. Our opposition does not necessarily rest in the policy decision that you guys have to make about whether or not you would like to tax these digital services. Our opposition comes in the change to the standard revenue model of the distribution of those dollars between state and local government. If you are going to tax these, we feel it would be appropriate to leave them under the model that other services of this nature are taxed under, and allow a revenue stream to flow back to the people that are actually impacted by things like rights of way and service areas. And we don't think it's an appropriate diversion of revenue to education, and actually might alleviate some of the issues that were raised by Director Noble should you advance this, if you went back to the traditional model of the share between state revenue and local government revenue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Novotny. Anybody else? Anybody have questions for Mr. Novotny? Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm opposed to the bill, but just want to understand the county commissioner's position. So I haven't really seen the county commissioners come out with, I'm for the reductions, but it seems like the county commissioners haven't really gotten a plan out there on that. So if you're not going to be for the reductions on education, what revenues do you want? Because, while I'm opposed to the bill, you don't seem to want a sales tax distribution. I assume that it applies also to other sales tax discussions that have been out there. So what is the county's, what is their proposal? Because it's cryptic to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Novotny, please.
Mr. Co-Chair, Representative Gray, yesterday, the County Commissioners Association completed what we call our bill review process. So you're going to actually receive our position on all of those questions. And so I guess I'm going to let that document speak for itself. But we tend to typically try to stay in our lanes and focus on living on those traditional sources of revenue that directly impact our ability to deliver the services that we have to constituents.
Thank you. And any further questions for the witness? I see none. Any further testimony? Please state your name and who you represent.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Beth Lance, and I'm here today representing AT&T. AT&T is opposed to this bill. Just a couple things that you've heard here today, and with these proposed amendments, I think it's important to understand that franchise fees are put into place in order to access right-of-way. They are not themselves a sales tax. And so these kinds of amendments that have been brought today are inherently favoring one piece of industry over another, which is creating an discriminatory tax. And so because AT&T's tax principles are based in neutrality, and that being an important cornerstone for taxation, and with these amendments, the bill becomes inequitable. AT&T is opposed.
Thank you, Madam. Representative Sweeney.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not understanding. So is AT&T not in the streaming business, or what is AT&T not in?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sweeney, thank you for your question. AT&T currently has holdings in satellite and DirecTV and in streaming as well. AT&T holds a streaming service called AT&T TV and a streaming service known as HBO Max. And so AT&T actually has holdings in both. And to now create taxation, apparently, if both these amendments are approved in just streaming, again, is discriminatory. So.
Thank you, Madam, and Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here. I find your testimony interesting. So what's your solution?
Well, overall, I'm just going to say I'm opposed to the bill for today. I think the solution is just that any tax that were to be brought needs to clearly be non-discriminatory. And each of these industries obviously are providing substantially the same services and are of a similar nature. So that's the concern.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further testimony? Oh, Representative Sweeney.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. So I would think that the proposed amendments to the amendments do favorably cover some of the services that you talked about, but I must be missing some. I understand there are components of your business that we're definitely going after on this tax. But aren't there other portions of your business that the amendments to the amendments would also cover favorably?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sweeney, yes, that would potentially be correct. But again, AT&T as a corporation really only supports non-discriminatory tax. And this would continue to be discriminatory.
Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question then. Do you see any difference in this proposal, given that it's a digital product? You've had that in place for a few years. And it used to be that folks would go to the place that busted blocks, and get a video, or go to the big box store and buy a video. How is that any different from what you're talking about in your HBO Max?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, if I understand correctly, I would just say that these industries are absolutely competitors right now. So while I understand what you're saying, that technology may be changing and we may begin to see more and more shifts in this technology and in this industry, as of right now, certainly all of these pieces of industry are competitors.
Any further questions from the committee? Seeing none, any other testimony? Thank you, Mal. Seeing none. Is there any comments that anybody wants to make on the bill?
Move the bill.
Okay. The bill was moved by Representative Sweeney and seconded by Representative Henderson. Any further comments by the committee or for the amendments? Okay, Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to move Standing Committee Amendment number 1, which I provided copies for, and I think everyone has that. If I can get a second, I'll discuss it.
Seconded by Representative Sweeney.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Mr. Chairman. So committee, as I say, this is not a new tax, and it's only updating the tax code. And so I would ask for your favorable consideration of this amendment with the understanding that I plan to bring other amendments as per the discussion that we've had so far to help update this as best we can going to the floor. I'm not sure if it's better to go ahead and approve this than add the amendments. What's the committee's preference on that?
Representative Sweeney?
So your proposal, thank you, Mr. Chairman, is to adopt in entirely the proposed amendment and then we would go back step 2 and amend the amendment.
Yes.
Okay.
Just to be clear, that the second part would be the one that we've just discussed. And put that into it.
Any comments on the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can
Go
I-
ahead.
Okay.
Representative Gray.
I just want to clarify. I want to make sure I know what I'm voting on. Is it this amendment or this amendment? Which one is it?
This one.
Okay.
Amendment number 1, I believe, is the one.
Can someone explain to me what exactly this does?
What this, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. What this does is it updates the statute as indicated to incorporate the provisions which will enable the tax code to also apply to digital streaming. What the other amendment does that we're going to contemplate next is to make sure that we don't bump up against not complying with the federal acts that are related here.
Let's just focus on amendment number 1 initially, and then we'll go over number 2 later. Thank you. Any further comments or questions on amendment number 1?
Call for the question.
Question?
Okay, the question has been called. All those in favor of amendment number 1, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll make it 5.
Okay.
It passed. Now amendment number 2.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move that we incorporate the yellow language that we see here, just so the secretary is keeping up with this, to incorporate the yellow language. If you look at the amendment number 1 on line 18, you see the word benefit, and then it'll start with or those services and so forth. I want to replace between benefit and are this language here. Okay? Everybody understand that? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think it also will replace on lines 29 and 31, the new language there
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
in a similar fashion.
Okay, so we're all clear.
All right,
I need a second.
seconded.
Okay.
Anybody have any questions on? I seconded it. Anybody have any questions on amendment number 2 or comments?
Okay, call the question.
All those in favor, say aye or raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll make it 5.
Okay. And then my next.
So that those amendments are both approved.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Representative Henderson.
Mr. Chairman and committee, I'd make a final motion to amend the section of the bill that Representative Gray was expressing concern about and others. And we heard in testimony that it would make it a lot simpler if we took out the designated, if you look at your bill, where it refers to, there's a couple of places where it refers to the 3 accounts And what I'd like to do, Secretary, is I'd like to move that we delete those and then have the right technical language to have it go to the general fund using the same model that we use now for the distribution of revenue as Director Noble was referring to. If I can get a second on that, I'll explain. I'll second it. So frankly, this here is a key step in terms of, you know, we don't have a lot of money to waste here in Wyoming. This is an opportunity to generate more revenue, as you know, but I don't want to make it more difficult for the department that takes care of this to keep track of it. So I would ask for your favorable vote, if you would, to allow this amendment.
Any for Mr. Sweeney, Representative Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what we're doing then in favor of this amendment, which I totally am, but we would have LSO, if the amendment's adopted, provide conforming language.
Yes, sir.
Within the bill, because there's a number of spots under definitions and in distribution, several spots where this is referenced. So is that the intent?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Representative Gray.
Mr. Chairman, so thank you. Just to clarify, my concern was the testimony trying to take it out. I'm opposed to the bill, but I mean, the distribution was the one thing that, I talk about distributions all the time. And I mean, this then just props up the general fund and localities that are already able to maintain their functions of government. And so I'm totally opposed to this amendment and opposed to the bill, but I'm totally opposed to this amendment. We cannot just say as a purpose of tax policy, something is convenient for the Department of Revenue, and that's where we're going to divert it, because if it gets plopped into these accounts, it's going to get spent. And so I just, the whole notion that this is really solving anything at that point. I mean, I'm opposed to the bill either way, but at that point, it's not even going to the main deficits that we have anyway. So please vote no on the amendment and no on the bill. Thank you.
Any further comments? Representative Sweeney?
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think this is, I think the comments you heard from the department was it's not a convenience, but it's going to come at a cost to the state if we aren't going to put it in the right place, which, again, I just think this is the good way to go, and 33 other states are doing it. And if you've got a no tax policy in your mind, then you're going to vote no anyway. But I'd ask your favorable approval.
Are you speaking on the amendment?
Yes.
Thank you. Any further comments?
Mr. Vice Chairman, did we ever have a second on the amendment?
Yeah.
All right. All right. Everyone who is in favor of this amendment, raise your hand. 5. Passes. Any further comments or any questions or amendments?
Yeah, I'd like to make a couple comments.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm opposed to this bill. It's a huge change. And I just think it's really wrong policy decision for our state. So I'd urge a no vote. Thank you.
I believe it's time to call the question.
Representatives Baker,
No.
Gray,
No.
Henderson,
Aye.
Jennings,
No.
Roscoe,
Aye.
Sweeney,
Aye.
Yin,
Aye.
Chairman Harshman left an aye vote. Mr. Vice Chairman, how on it?
Aye.
We have 6 ayes, 3 noes, the noes being Representatives Baker, Representative Gray, and Representative Jennings.
So with that, that bill passes. Thank you, Madam. Now, are we going to do another bill or are we done?
Yes, sir. I'll take over.
Okay, I'll take over now.
Thank you very much, committee. I appreciate your discussion. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 128, County Option Real Estate Transfer Tax. I think we have the distinguished representative from the county with the beautiful hills. Welcome. Good morning, sir. Tell us about your bill.
I would be happy to. Committee, Mr. Vice Chairman, nice to see you all. Nice to be in a different committee room than the one on the 3rd floor. The acoustics in here are much better. So, if with the indulgence of the Vice Chairman, I would like to do, before I work the bill, make a few comments. Thank you very much. So, the county option real estate transfer tax, ultimately, what's on my mind is that we need, given the revenue situation both in the state and for local government, is to create options for local governments to find mechanisms to raise money for their particular needs. I cannot speak to the issues in any of the counties you all live in, except for Representatives Roscoe and Yin, because they are also from my part of the world. But it's a problem for all of the counties. If you look at just what's happening currently with what we are doing in budget cuts, things like cuts in the Department of Agriculture for grant funding, the county tobacco prevention monies coming out of the Department of Health, OSLI with the MRG monies. I can go on, but we are reducing funding that goes to local governments outside of the normal streams of severance taxes, direct distributions. So they're already getting budget cuts. These are amplified by the fact that their sales tax revenues are declining as well. Ad valorem taxes are declining as well. What will these local governments do? How do they raise money? So I will move from there to the specific needs of Teton County. And what is the overriding problem in Teton County right now? And it's workforce housing. We have a problem in maintaining any level of workforce housing. Just so you understand how dire the situation is, as of now, the median value of a single family home is $3.7 million. Now, I can't speak for any of you, but the possibility of buying a home for $3.7 million is far outside of my dreams. It's just not possible. And I actually had a fairly successful business in Teton County. For a worker who makes, and the median income is listed at about, where is that? Less than $77,000 a year. And that median income is raised, as you can imagine, there are a lot of people making a whole lot more than $77,000, but they're not part of the local workforce. These are people who are living in Teton County and making their money elsewhere. So for the local worker, what do you do? Even if you rent a 1-bedroom apartment, average rent is $2,000 a month. So I just want to make sure you understand the situation on the ground and the dire need to raise revenues to deal with this, for lack of a better word, I will call it a crisis. So I will come back to that if you have any questions about it, but now I'd like to go through the bill with you. It's a county option. I will highlight the word option, real estate transfer tax. If we go to page 2, we start with the definitions. And I mean, these are standard definitions that exist throughout our statute. So Unless there are any questions on definitions, I will move on because the more interesting part comes on starting on page 3 with imposition. So if you look at line 9, it's very clear. A county may impose an excise tax on the sale of real estate. No requirement, totally a may. But you get into shells, the revenue shall be used in any county that chooses to implement it in specific percentages for specific purposes. And I modeled this language on the special purpose excise tax. The only difference being sales taxes tend to be fairly constant. A real estate transfer tax, due to since it's based on real estate sales, can have a lot of peaks and valleys. So rather than base it on a dollar amount, I think it will work better as a percentage of the dollars that come in. No tax shall be, and then you get to line 18, no tax shall be imposed unless the voters approve it. So this is not something where a county commission can just do it by resolution. It requires voter approval. On to page 4, it's how will this proposition go on the ballot? There's 2 ways. Either the county commissioners with the concurrence of at least 50% of the incorporated cities within the county put it on the ballot, or 5% of the electors put it on the ballot. This is similar. This is no different than language throughout our statutes about other local taxes. And it continues. All of the voting pieces are just copied from existing legislation using particularly the special purpose excise tax. And that's the same, all of page 5 is that same language. If it is approved, it then comes up 4 years later, the second general election. If it's defeated, it can't come up until then. So we move on to page 6 and we get to an important piece on line 6B, the basis of the tax. The tax shall be collected based on the full actual consideration paid. So where this gets interesting is if for a gift or a deed transferred that's not part of the exemptions, it will be collected based on the most recent assessed value. So that's just to deal with situations where there's not an actual sales price to manage it. The grantee shall pay the tax. So that's the buyer, not the seller. Moving on to page 7, top of it, Romanet I. This is pretty important because this is the amount that can be excluded by the counties. And this is particularly valuable in your county, Representative Jennings, when they do implement this. Or yours, Representative Gray. So the thing is, you need an exclusion to protect the workforce. Because if you've got workers trying to buy a house, the premise is they shouldn't have to pay this extra if you're trying to create revenue to create workforce housing. So the county has an option to exclude up to $1 million of any sale. They don't have to exclude anything. It's a choice. They can say all of every sale is subject to the tax. And then in Romanet II, the tax is set at 1% over that excluded amount. You go to exemptions. The tax shall not be imposed upon, and we go on the exemptions, anything that occurs prior to the effective date of the bill, a previously recorded instrument. I won't list all the exemptions, you can read them, but it's spouses, children, goes on page 9 regarding a reorganization of a trust or delinquent taxes, a sale based on delinquent taxes, a sheriff's deed. A particular one of interest on line 15, Romanet 12, agricultural land is excluded. I could go on with the exemptions. If there's questions about them, we can come back to them. On page 11, it's collection procedure starting on line 16 is done through the county treasurer. You looked at it on page 12, the county clerk shall not record a deed if the tax has not been paid. This statement will not be a public record, as is true with all real estate transactions in Wyoming. If anybody discloses it, it's a misdemeanor. On page 13, it once again talks about the grantee paying the tax at the time of recording the deed. If the property is located in one or more county, how that will be split. Distribution on page 14. It will be done in the same fashion as a sales tax within a county, where it's done in proportion to the population. And it has to, then on page 15, the important thing, the revenue shall be used in the specific percentages for the specific purposes as provided in the proposition. Bottom of page 15, county clerk shall not record any document unless the tax is paid. And we get to section 3 on page 17. Department of Revenue shall adopt rules. And section 4, this act will be effective immediately upon passage of the bill, which should be in about 2 weeks. And after that, I will stand for any questions.
Any questions, committee? Thank you. Representative Yen.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Representative Schwartz. So just to clarify, a clarifying question on page 7, when we're talking about the tax rate, it's just 1% on the excess of whatever the optional first million that the county decides to exempt, right? So if I have $1.5 million house and the county chose the first million to exempt, I'm only paying a 1% on the 500,000.
Correct. And to give an example to show that, in 2020 in Teton County, there was approximately $1.8 billion in sales with approximately 600 sales. So you take those 600 sales, assuming the exclusion is $1 million, that would reduce 600 million from the 1.8 billion. That would leave 1.2 billion of taxable sales, which would generate $12 million. Does that answer your question, Representative? And I'm sorry, I forgot to go through the vice chair. I apologize.
Any other questions? Okay, well, we don't have a lot of time here, folks, so it's about 8 till right now. Like to go to the agency. I think Director Noble may still be on the internet. Offer him an opportunity. Director Noble?
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Dan Noble, Department of Revenue again. One thing that is a little curious, we're going to be drafting rules as a department on what is totally resides within the county. And I'm just curious as to what is expected as it relates to rule promulgation when in fact we will have no oversight or anything related to this particular tax. And I'm unclear as to what the intent is there.
Anything else?
That's it, Mr. Chairman. I'll stand for any questions you may have.
Do you have an answer there for that?
Mr. Vice Chairman, Director Noble, I will be honest, that was language that was incorporated from other excise tax bills, and I would be happy to amend that out of there because it will be dealt with on a local basis.
Okay. Anything else, Director?
Nothing, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone else on the internet has their hand raised, please, if you'd like to comment on this House Bill 128.
Mr. Chairman, I have Kristen Gunther. I'll admit her.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Kristen Gunther from the Wyoming Outdoor Council, and I will be very brief as we're short on time. Our organization has been before this committee in the past to express support for this bill in the past when it was a statewide tax. And we'd like to underscore and continue that support today. If it's not the pleasure of this committee to consider this as a statewide option, we certainly support creating options for county and local governments. The only other thing I would add is that as we've been speaking with our membership increasingly about the revenue options that may be on the table that the legislature is discussing, we do find this to be a tax that is easy to explain to people, especially right now
many of our members are seeing, not just in Teton County, but in other counties, the increasing demand in the real estate market. And some have called it a boom in some areas of the state. And so this is something that people can see. This is a tax that tends to be easy to explain. And so I would just add that as a note in support of the bill. And I'll stop it there for now. Thank you. And I will sit for any questions.
Any questions, committee? Okay, thank you, Ms. Gunther. Anyone else on the internet with their hand raised?
No, Mr. Chairman, I don't see any other hands up.
Okay, in the room here, any agency legislators? Vice Chairman Duncan. Morning.
Good morning, committee. I rise in opposition of this bill strongly, and I'd like to push back a little bit on the previous commenter. This is not an easy tax to explain. It's actually quite complicated. Just to give you a little perspective, any buyer that goes to buy a house and there is a real estate transfer tax, a buyer cannot purchase a property that has a government finance loan, has a real estate transfer tax attached to it, cannot purchase that property. That real estate transfer tax that has to be purchased, has to be paid by someone else, because that transfer tax would have to be paid by, it cannot be attached to that mortgage. So that in turn means the seller has to buy it. So in this bill, it says the buyer has to pay it. So that means when a purchase, that means the seller's going to have to pay it. So that means you're basically paying a double commission. So think about that. So when you're sitting there and put the example for Teton County, that is going to make a huge difference in the purchase price. It's going to make a huge difference in the transaction. Now, if my county, Goshen County, were to go and have this option, that's going to push one of the poorest communities in the state. It's going to push a renter out of the market of being able to purchase. Because something simple as maybe $800 makes a big difference, and it's going to push them out of the market.
Okay. Any questions? Representative Yen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Duncan, so are there a lot of government-backed loans for houses over $1 million?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, actually there are. You're currently in the regulations have changed to where you are now able to do FHA financing for condos. So in your area, look at the different types of markets and the different kinds of things that your condos and the different things that that you can do. You can do starter condos and different things in Jackson for, you know, a starter is $850,000. So I'm sure it's not unreasonable that you can find a condo for $1 million.
Follow up, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if I'm buying a condo for $1.5 million and I get an FHA loan and we exempt the first $1 million, we're saying I can't pay $500 on a $1.5 million home. Is that correct?
Ms. Duncan, I represent Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Possibly. It depends on your situation and your market. But the point is, it's a very complicated scenario. And when you're doing a county option, you have to remember that what's good for one county is going to be shared across all counties. And so when we're doing this in statute, we have to remember it's equitable for all counties, not just one county. So Teton County has many different options and they have not brought to the table all the other options. So a transfer tax is not the option to be solving your workforce housing.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you, Representative, appreciate it. Anyone else here who'd like to testify on this bill? Come forward, please. State your name and who you represent.
There we go. And we're not. Okay, thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I'm Lori Urbakite, representing the Wyoming Realtors, and we are opposed to this transfer tax bill, as we will be opposed to all transfer tax bills, probably till after I'm long gone. But our issue, I mean, there's several issues, and I know you're running out of time. One, it's not equitable to tax one investment type and not others. So real estate is number one method for people to gain wealth in the United States, and certainly here in Wyoming as well. And so why are we taxing the sale of of that investment property when we don't tax the sale of stocks or bonds or any other type of investments? So we don't think it's equitable. And second, we don't think it's constitutional because we're exempting ag right out the bat. It's a county option alone instead of statewide. So I don't see how you can call it constitutional or equitable. We think there are other solutions to workforce housing. In fact, we've been brainstorming on other solutions for workforce housing. I was just in another committee that I think there's some real possibilities to help that issue, and we're supportive of that. As far as who pays the tax, whether it's the buyer or the seller, I do not know why that needs to be specified in the bill, because it comes out of the transaction. You know, the money is going to be paid or the deed won't be filed. So it comes out of the transaction. Then if you have a case where there's a lender issue because it's tagged to the buyer and it can't be, it just should say it will be paid upon the register or the filing of the deed. It does not need to be specified in that manner. And I think I could go on for quite a while about it, but
It's the highlights.
we have time, so I'll just leave it at that. There are just a lot of
questions?
issues to
Thank
this
you.
bill.
Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to testify? Come forward, please.
Chairman?
Yes.
You know, it's 10:02. I'm just trying to understand what the plan is. Like, we've got the prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance, just hoping to.
Well, I don't want to keep you from that. So I'm going to carry it over.
I think, how many folks?
How many do we have to
How many do you
testify?
have here that want to testify?
Two.
Just two more?
Two more?
Why don't you both come up and sit down, and then we
Yeah.
can knock it out, and then we'll lay this over. We'll close
Mr.
public comment.
Mr. Moline, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman Committee. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau, as per my members' policy, sitting in opposition to this bill. I think there's several things as outlined by Ms. Urbakite that I wholeheartedly agree with, except about her exemptions on agriculture. Right now, it's exempt, but we know that there's also efforts to remove exemptions, so that could someday affect the agricultural land as well. One of the things I think is a problem is a negative, what in economics we call a negative externality, an unintended consequence of a negative nature. What you're going to do, quite possibly, is reduce the market value, albeit slightly. So you'll collect a tax at one point when the property is transferred, but because of having this tax hanging over their head, strong likelihood you're going to reduce property value. So you're going to have a one-time gain with a long time loss because of taxing property values. With that, Mr. Chairman, I tried to be as brief as possible, and I'll shut up and see if there's any
Thank you.
questions.
Any questions? Representative Sweeney?
Just a quick one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you have a lot of members in Teton County in particular?
Mr. Chairman, Representative
ahead.
Sweeney, we have some, but I realize that this isn't a Teton County bill. This is a county option. Any county, and there's still 23 of them, all 23 of them can do it. So this is an issue that is brought by Teton County. And I have about 12,000 members across the state of Wyoming, many of them that this will impact if it goes through. I will bring up one thing, Mr. Chairman, if I may. This is not a new problem across the state. employee housing. This has been a long, long time. I'm only 58 and I can remember it being a problem for 30 years. So all of a sudden, this is becoming a way to solve a problem that's been ongoing for decades. With that, Mr. Chairman, I will get off my high horse and
Thank you. Thank you.
sit for
other
any further
questions?
questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Bob McLaurin with WHAM, and we stand in support of this bill. State tax policy is driving real estate development in Jackson Hole. I've lived there off and on for 40 years, and I've seen it. I worked at a resort town in Colorado where we had this tax. It did not diminish values. It did not impede real estate sales. I do agree with Ms. Urbicite that it ought to be just something between the buyer and the seller negotiated. But it will not negatively impact values. And that a good number of the transactions in Jackson Hole these days, and I'm talking about $7-8 million or figures, $10, $12 million transactions are cash transactions. And I've lived there for 40 years and I've never seen values go up so much. So we do stand in support of it. Thank you very
Okay.
much, sir.
Any questions? Okay, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate your testimony. And thanks everyone for coming to Thursday. There'll be notice on that. So thank you very much for your testimony. We're adjourned. Close public comment.